I hate that every time it comes up, Manon's like, but she didn't have time to worry about that. She would think on it later. And I'm like, no, bitch, how about you think about it right now?
It's so similar to how Celaena was in Throne of Glass and stuff. And we're like, what do you mean you don't care?
Yes.
You should fucking care. This is weird.
I care very deeply. Why do you not care? Maybe you should think about that right now. Or they're like, she pushed the thoughts aside. I'm like, don't push them aside. Put them in the forefront of your brain and sit there until you figure it out.
Hi everyone! Welcome back to the Book on Fantasy podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today we are continuing our Heir of Fire coverage with chapters 27 through 30. This set of chapters felt like we were slowing down, I feel like, to focus more on relationships, I think, between characters. I feel like we get a pretty big change in Celaena's attitude toward her Fae form. Dorian and Sorsha are getting steamy, and then Chaol is getting closer with Adian.
Yes.
And then Ren and Murtaugh as well. And I was almost like, can we officially consider Chaol a rebel now? I don't think he would agree with that statement, but
I don't know. He was pretending to be high in an opium den to cover for Ren. So I think that puts you pretty solidly in rebel territory. I will say I had two main things for the set of chapters. My overarching thoughts. My overarching thoughts. Number one, I love Adian. Oh my God. There was so much Adian in these chapters. I was so happy. We got current Adian, baby Adian. Oh, I love him. Oh, and although I do have a speculation about him that is pretty damning to Adian. So I will share when we get there. And then secondly, on a little bit, more solemn note, I do feel this set of chapters was really important for Chaol's character development. I thought, at least for me, a lot of my notes, I had a lot of thoughts about Chaol's thoughts and actions, and just as a Chaol defender, I got to stick up for my guy. So I have some thoughts about him.
Yeah, I mean, between last episode's set of chapters and then now, I feel like we're just getting a lot from Chaol. So
yeah, I think so too.
Which is good. It's important though. And I agree, it's been helpful to be able to see inside his little brain there and see what's going on.
Well, I think it's important too, because I think Chaol is meant to represent a lot of the population of Otterlin. So his journey in realizing the reality of the situation that's of the continent is probably going to be a lot of people's journey.
As a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 27 through 30 specifically, but it is likely that references to all the books we've covered so far will come up as well, and this includes TOG, COM, and TAB. If you haven't finished these books and you don't want any spoilers, make sure you pause here and then come back when you're caught up. Otherwise, the series is brand new to us, so you won't be getting any spoilers for the rest of the series, but you will be getting plenty of unhinged theories. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. If you are reading along with us, then next week's Heir of Fire episode will cover chapters 31 through 35. And at that point, we will be halfway. We will have finished part 1.
And we'll be moving on to Heir of Fire, because part 1 is titled Heir of Ash. And I have some thoughts about that, which we'll talk about in the next episode. And what that means for Celaena's journey. I know. I have a feeling that part 2 is just going to take off like a rocket. It's just going to be like... all the foundation work has been laid, and now it's time for shit to start happening.
I'm so excited. I know. And then next, Addison, where are we at with the Onyx Storm countdown?
Okay. Today, the day we're recording, is September 25th, and there are 118 days until Onyx Storm is released.
Woo.
I know, we're getting close to the under the 100. Then it feels like a real countdown,
Yes. Yeah. That just reminds me of the 100 Days of School.
Oh, yes.
We
Like,
always
yes.
used to do.
Lorraine and I used to be teachers, so there was always a big countdown up to the 100th day of school. And then for me, once I got to 100th day of school, I would start counting down to how many days of school were left. Literally, it would be January, and I'd say like, oh, only, 96 more days. And teachers look at me and be like, don't you think it's a little early to count down? I'm like, it's never too early. I start counting down day one.
Too early. Nope. Yep. And then finally, if you are enjoying the show, then the very best way for you to support us is to rate our podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. And if you are attempting to convince someone else to start listening as well, then here is something that you can tell them. When you are reading a book paired with a podcast covering said book, then you just get to be the reading passenger princess. I'm coining this as an official term, okay? You are just along for the ride, reading for the vibe and listening for the tea, okay? The tea being all the deep diving and the analysis that typically requires, honestly, a lot of precious brain power, which, to be perfectly honest, is pretty limited for most of us because we have to allocate it to house things, work things, social things, and, just whatever else you have going on in your
kid
life,
things,
right? So,
if you have kids.
Kids, pets, any other being that requires your attention.
Not to mention, holiday season is coming up, and I don't know about y'all, but I treat Christmas like it's a full-time job because I love Christmas. I love it. And so for me, I'm going to be extra crazy there. I'm going to be extra fried, but I will make it work for you guys because I want you to be my passenger princesses. Carpool for everybody. I will drive us all around.
Yeah, consider us your royal chauffeur. Okay.
Sounds good.
So honestly, name a better gift than a free podcast that can be your own personal book club without adding to your mental load. I think it's perfect. And honestly, I myself listen to a few different book podcasts covering other books, and I really enjoy them because of everything I just said. We work hard for this one and what we're doing, but otherwise, I do enjoy being a reading passenger princess.
Me too. So, it is really fun. I listen to a lot of podcasts when I cook dinner because that's just like a good time for me to zone out. And it's really exciting when another podcast group will have a revelation or an idea or a theory. And I'm like, whoa, it never even crossed my mind. And so I do really appreciate all the hard work that really anybody that does a podcast does, but especially book podcasts, because it's a crazy process to remember and combine and connect. And so to all the other podcasters out there, I see you and we love you and keep it up.
Yes. And also to all of our listeners, thank you for being our reading passenger princesses. We will drive you anywhere when it
hopefully to Terracin.
To Throne of Glass.
Yeah. Right now we're doing a little detour in Wendland and Mistward, but hopefully we'll be able to drive you to Terracin someday. We'll see.
Exactly. All right. So that is all for housekeeping. And let's get into the episode. We will start with a book report for chapter summaries, and then we will dive into an analysis and offer theories for each chapter. And finally, we will share our favorite moments. And with that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Of course. Chapter 27. Manon and Astrid watched on as the Yellowlegs practiced riding their mounts, and although it was a magnificent sight to behold, Manon had ulterior motives. She was on her way to see Abraxos and wanted to make sure that they were well and truly gone for the next several hours. Manon gave Astrid several orders that mainly consisted of keep your eye on the Yellowleg Coven and train the 13 harder. Manon watched as the overseer and his men struggled to get a saddle on Abraxos. Abraxos hated the whip and the men who wielded them just as much. After yet another failed attempt, Manon told the overseer that his men were cowards, and when he stupidly made a grab for her, she slashed his hand with her razor-sharp iron nails. She licked the blood off her nails and almost spit it out. It tasted vile. But Manon had other things to focus on and pushed the thought aside. I, on the other hand, have not been able to stop thinking about it and why that is.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Why? We'll talk about it. In a feat of absolute steel nerves, Manon stared Abraxos down and reminded him that he is hers. Manon and Abraxos build the truss bridge, and Manon kicks the overseer and his stupid men the fuck out. She then commands Abraxos to let her put on the saddle. She also tells him that she will build him new iron spikes and teeth to replace what had been lost or damaged. It took 5 days, but Abraxos complied with all of Manon's commands. Manon stood with Astrid and Sorrel in the training hall. Sorrel expressed concern over how the youngest Blackbeak coven was performing, especially the coven leader. Astrid continues to report on how the rest of the coven is doing, including Phaline and Fallon, the green-eyed demon twins, and Edda and Briar, Manon's shadows, trained from birth to blend into any sliver of darkness. They made a plan to reconvene later, and then seeing the question in their eyes, Manon tells them she will be airborne with Abraxos in a week, and then they would be flying as one. It was a lie, but they believed her anyways. Chapter 28. Little disclaimer in this one, everybody. Buckle up, because this was a very long chapter with a lot of sections, but very informative, but it's long. Days passed for Celaena, and surprisingly, not all of them were awful. Rowan surprised her one day by taking her to the commune of healers, where the finest healers in the world learned, taught, and worked. The next day, Rowan surprised her yet again and told her they were going somewhere else, this time for an overnight trip. With a questioning look, Rowan tells her that another body's been found with the same MO, and he wanted to go to a neighboring village to question the local townspeople, and they were much more likely to talk to Celaena than to Rowan. Rowan commands her to shift, and as usual, Celaena informs him that she can't. But then she felt the building anger at what the horrible creature had done to her and to the others, and Rowan encouraged her to use that anger, to hone it, to help her shift. Celaena shifts and Rowan begins his taunts, but Celaena was a better student than Rowan gave her credit for, and so she feigned the tantrum Rowan was expecting, and as he moved to strike, she dodged and whacked him upside his head. LOL. Rowan stopped dead and with a feral grin said, "Oh, you better run now." Best part of this whole set of chapters. Celaena took off running and for the first time in a long time felt a relief in the grief that had decimated her soul for so long. Rowan raced beside her but made no move to grab her. Celaena realized that Rowan was laying? As they made their way through the forest, Celaena could have sworn Rowan was smiling. And so was Lorraine, because she's a sucker for romance and now she wants to love Rowan. But Addison is not. I'm not so easily won over, okay? They arrived at the small village and quickly realized they were going to get nowhere fast. Not a single townsperson was eager to talk to any fae, demi, or otherwise. And after several attempts with the different townsfolk, they continued to make their way through the town. And Rowan informs her that for far too long, they took what they wanted and it went unchecked. And even though the laws had changed, mortals still did not trust them. But then our girl caught a whiff of her greatest weakness. Chocolate. Celaena takes Rowan's money, LOL, and basically demands in a polite way that the shopkeeper sell her treats, remembering the way Nehemia had never let bigoted idiots keep her out of any shop in Rifthold. And she had the sense that her friend might have been proud of the way she went from shop to shop that afternoon, head held high, and charmed the ever-loving hell out of those villagers. Suddenly, the villagers were eager to chat as long as they sold something, and Celaena was all too happy to oblige, especially if it meant making Rowan carry every bag and box. Celaena offered him a chocolate treat, but Rowan declined, citing that he didn't eat sweets ever. Boo, no surprise there. They declined the offer for a fancy sweet at the end for fear of attracting the wrong kind of attention, and instead fell asleep under the forest canopy. We then enter into Celaena's dream. Aelin is 8 years old again and can't seem to sleep. After an accident at the library that day where she burned a whole bookshelf of ancient tomes, people are upset, but none more so than her parents. They argue about what the best course of action is to help their beloved daughter. Before Adian could react, Evelyn and Ro were at Aelin's door. Ro good-naturedly tells Adian to get to bed, and knowing Aelin overheard them, they reassure her they won't send her to school. With a quick kiss on the head and a murmured goodnight, Ro departed. But as her father walked out, Evelyn remained and watched her for a long while, and as she turned, Aelin could have sworn tears gleamed on her pale, beautiful face. Celaena is awakened with a jolt, and Rowan commands her to light a fire for breakfast. Celaena reluctantly agrees to try and has some success. And by that I mean she ignited the entire surrounding area. But at least she didn't panic and shift back into her human form, so I guess we'll call that a tie. Shifting, it seemed, was to be the least of her problems. Chapter 29. It had just been a kiss. At least that's what Sorsha told herself every day. Sorsha enters Dorian's room with another variation of the iron cocktail Dorian was taking every day to hide his magic. But as she attempted to retreat, Dorian prowled toward her and took her hand. He asked her why she continued to help him despite knowing the risks. Sorsha gets all hot and bothered and basically runs out of the room before Dorian can stop her. Heart-thundering, Sorsha reminded herself that she had survived this long and would only survive the road ahead if she continued to be unnoticed, reliable, and quiet. But then the door swung open and Sorsha decided to damn it all to hell. She had to know what it was like. just for a little while, to belong to someone, to be wanted and cherished. Without another thought, Sorsha grabbed Dorian and kissed him fiercely. I know. Lauren's so happy. Chaol hated himself for lying to his men about where he was going, but he had waited long enough. It was finally time for Adian to meet with Ren and Murtaugh and hear what they had to say about magic or lack thereof in Otterlin. As they waited, the topic of Chaol's deal that he'd made with his father to return to Aniel comes up, and Chaol asks Adian about his father. Adian informs him that he does not know who his father is and doesn't really care to know. I wonder if this will come up later. Addison has thoughts. I do. I love this shit. Chaol and Adian are immediately on high alert when they hear boots scraping the stone, followed by a rasping breath, and are shocked to discover it's a badly wounded Ren. Ren quickly tells them that he and Murtaugh were followed. Ren managed to kill 2 of them, but there were still 6 men following him. With his heightened phase senses, Adian heard their approach. He quickly directed Chaol and Ren to hide, and when the 6 dark, hulking men standing shoulder to shoulder entered the alley, Adian purred, "None of you are leaving this alley alive." They didn't. Adian tells Chaol and Ren that more are coming and are combing the slums door to door for Ren, and that they needed to find a place to hide. Chapter 30. Pretending to be 3 drunk, staggering men out for a night on the town, they made their way to the opium den Ren had named. They were greeted by the reek of unwashed bodies, waste, sweet smoke, and a madam. Even Adian gave Ren a disapproving look. The madam quickly ushered them to a cushioned alcove and gave them all the tools they needed to play the part of 3 men enjoying an evening doing hard drugs. The king's men arrived, and the madam played her part brilliantly. Chaol's heart was thundering, and he itched to reach for his blade, but he stayed limp and loose, and when the men pulled the curtain back, Adian played his part perfectly, complaining that they had been waiting 20 minutes for wine. The men swore at them and continued on. 5 minutes later, they were gone. An hour later, Murtaugh arrived. The madam led them to her private office, and with surprising adeptness, disinfected, stitched, and bound Ren's wound. He would survive, but he had lost a lot of blood and would be incapacitated for a while. They discuss where they will take Ren once he is able to be moved, and Chaol and Adian come to the heartbreaking realization that both Murtaugh and Ren are homeless. Adian tells Murtaugh to tell Chaol his theory about magic. Murtaugh tells Chaol their story from the beginning, leaving nothing out: the horror, the danger, and the heartbreak. He then tells Chaol the waves the day magic had vanished formed a rough triangle across the continent, the first line going right from Rifthold to the frozen waste, the second going from the frozen waste to the edge of the deserted peninsula, and the third going from there back to Rifthold. Chaol tells them there is a hidden apartment in a warehouse in the slums, and they can stay there as long as they need, and that surely the owner wouldn't mind one bit. And that concludes our chapter summaries. Yeah, it was nice. Oh. Yeah, I think there's some shifting in Chaol's perspective and empathy, which we'll talk about when we get to that chapter. But
Wonderful. Thank you for the book report. And now let's get into the analysis, starting with chapter 27. And a quick disclaimer, everybody. I am sorry to disappoint. I unfortunately forgot to do chapter titles. It just totally slipped my mind. I don't know if anybody's noticed or if you appreciated that from the past few episodes, but I normally go back and do them, and then I don't know what happened. I just completely forgot to do that.
I certainly have noticed, and feel free to send us DMs and emails letting Lorraine know how much that affected your podcast listening and how you're deeply disappointed, because I am devastated.
They're
so funny. I rely on them for humor.
Maybe I can make some up on the fly.
Okay, just try your best.
Yes, okay. We start off with Manon, who is observing the first Yellowlegs coven of the day take the crossing with their wyverns. Iskra led the group with her giant wyvern named Fendir, and Astron comments from the side that they suit each other. The rest of the 13 was training in hand-to-hand combat, led by Phaelin and Fallon, while Manon had been on her way to the caverns to check in with Abraxos. Manon informed Astron she would need to keep the 13 occupied because she was going to train with Abraxos. Astron is forced to decide who she would side with, Granny Blackbeak or Manon, since it was well known Granny would gut her if she let Manon out of her sight again. After urging, "Are you her spy or my second?" Astron assures Manon her continued loyalty by responding, "I serve you." Manon considers what she had done to earn such unwavering loyalty, even if it was built in by nature of being heir. But she goes on to command Astron to ensure the 13 added tumbling to their training and that she would be tasked with learning the training details of the Yellowlegs when she got airborne. Astrid nods and goes on to inform her she had already had the shadows track the Yellowlegs in the halls, and then Manon continues, keep them in line unless you want your nose broken a second time. Astrid grins and states, we don't move without your command, lady. We don't really get a ton of page time with Astrid, but I really like her dedication and loyalty to Manon. I think the witches don't really, express affection or any nice emotions at all, really, but you can tell that she's very dedicated to Manon, kind of in the same way that Adian is, to Aelin.
I think that's a good parallel. I really feel that, especially with Manon bonding Abraxos, we're going to see an evolution in Manon's character and how she feels and values relationships. Because I feel like this sentiment has been brought up quite a few times already with Manon that they weren't really friends in the way mortals were, but there was loyalty and honor. And that gets brought up a lot to describe their relationship. And I have a feeling that Manon is going to become a Sour Patch Kid, sour on the outside, soft on the inside.
Oh,
I have a feeling.
Interesting. Yeah, you can kind of tell that she is a little bit. I mean, even with, I think, how she treated Abraxos so far, and then just her side thoughts, like in this example with Astrid, and how she seems to be very dedicated to her, aside from being obligated to. Manon arrives at Abraxos' pen, where she would have preferred to be alone with him without the overseer and his handlers for 3 reasons. First, she just wants time with her little baby. Second, the smell of their blood was distracting. Many men had already mysteriously disappeared after crossing the bridge to the Omega, and though Manon hadn't killed any of them yet, she didn't need the temptation. And third, she knew Abraxos, quote, loathed them with their whips and spears and chains and their hulking presence. The sound of the whips alone made him cringe and bare his teeth.
Oh, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Okay, so what do you think is happening to the men who are going missing? Did you just take it at face value that the witches are just killing them and eating them or drinking their blood or whatever witch stuff they do? Or do you think that there's something else going on?
I feel like you're asking makes me suspicious that something else is going on. Because I thought they addressed that later. Because the other witches gave her a grin and she's kind of like, okay, bitches, I know that you're the ones eating them. But just keep it on the DL, basically. Or like, don't kill too many of them. So I just assumed that explained it. But now let's hear your thoughts then.
Okay. So initially, first read, I'm like, oh, the witches, a minimum, there's 42 witches because there's 3 groups and 3 covens each, right? If not hundreds others. I'm a little unclear on the math there, but I just took it at face value that just some of the witches were just like, I'm just going to eat these men or drink their blood or whatever. But then later on, when Manon is having that conversation with Astrid and Sorrel, and it's heavily suggested that they are having sex with the men, but it's implied that the men are still living because Manon even says, don't you think I've noticed them smiling at her all day? So the first thought indicates that they're going missing totally. They're just not coming back. But in the conversation with Manon and Astrid and Sorrel, it implies that the witches are basically having sex with the men, but they're not killing them. So it makes me wonder if there's 2 separate things going on there.
Oh, I totally did not catch that distinction.
So that's why I wonder what's going on. Or maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe that really is meant to be just like the witches are just getting it on and then there's a couple oopsies. I don't know. But especially when you combine that with the weird tasting blood, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, it makes me feel like there is something more nefarious going on with the men, quote unquote, if that's what we're going to call them. Maybe they're created. I don't know. I have some thoughts, but if there's something else going on there.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely keep my eye out for any other indication about that. For now, I just assumed that it was the witches because even Manon's like, their blood smells really tempting and you keep them away from me. I interpreted that conversation with Astrid and Sorrel as her acknowledging that the witches were the ones responsible, but I could have misread that. But I have definitely taken notice of the fact that she keeps noting that everything about the men smells weird or whatever it is. And so I really want to know what's going on with them, because at this point I'm like, okay, something seems off. I don't know what it is yet, but
Detective Madison and Lorraine are on the case.
Yes, we're going to figure it out at some point here. The overseer and the handlers had been attempting to put a saddle on Abraxos, and from what Manon could tell, he would have preferred Manon just give up and choose a different wyvern so he wouldn't have to risk his men. The handlers crack their whips near Abraxos, who quickly decides, fuck this shit, and lunges to snap at them. Manon states, your men have cowards' hearts, and then stalks toward Abraxos. The overseer attempts to stop her, but Manon slashes him with her iron claws, then licks the blood off her nails. She immediately regrets this decision, though, noting that the blood tasted rotten, as if it had curdled or festered inside of a corpse for days. She also notices it was too dark for human blood. If the witches had indeed been killing these men, why had no one reported this? This is another example of Manon picking up on the unusual smell of things within these mountains. Initially, she had noticed the smell of Duke, Caltaine, and Roland, as well as just a general feeling that something was off regarding the walls of the Omega and the mountains themselves. But now we get this additional piece of information that the overseer, literally his physical body, is also disgusting and is described similarly to the other things that she's already noticed. So I kind of felt like maybe the king is, at bare minimum, just influencing them with his dark magic, and maybe that is causing something to change about their essence. And in that case, I guess I would assume that it's to keep the men in line and perhaps even kind of make them, I don't know, unfeeling so they wouldn't question what they're doing in the Farian Gap with the wyverns. But now I want to know what you're thinking about it, since everything you alluded to seems to suggest you have a lot of thoughts.
I do. So I'm all over the place because the initial evidence is that, okay, the men are disappearing, right? But then, as we just discussed, the conversation with Astrid and Sorrel suggests that they're having sex with the men, but they aren't killing them because they're smiling at Vesta all hours of the day, right? Then you have to also remember that there's many other covens, and so we don't really get a lot of insight into what those witches are doing, but we can assume that they're also at play in terms of what's going on. So I guess I'm confused because if the blood is nasty and too dark, which is reminiscent of how she described smelling the Duke, Caltaine, and Roland, then why doesn't she comment that the overseer and his men smell bad? If his blood is gross, shouldn't she smell that they smell off? You know what I'm saying? Or is it just their blood that's bad? So then is the blood a separate thing from the smell? But it seems like they should be connected. And then I also feel like it calls into question Manon's point. If the witches were disappearing and the men, then why had none of them reported the blood was bad? Like if she knows that Astrid, Sorrel, and Vesta are, biting the men, why have they not said anything? So then it made me wonder, is it all of them? Is it just some of them? Is it something only Manon can perceive? Like she has a heightened sensitivity to our theory is bad magic, like bad magic smell or side effects. And I don't know, it's hard to parse because there's lots of elements there. But overall, I think it's fair to say and contend that it's because it has something to do with their exposure to dark magic. I still feel very strongly it has something to do with that. So I'm going to posit like a very mini kind of off the wall theory. I'm wondering if the men there, quote unquote, are actually not men, but they're made beings that look like men. Because if you recall, we know the king has the power to create, or somewhat, because the creature in the library tunnels in Calm. Remember, it was like taken apart and put back together, which implying the king has that level of magic, right? And so I do wonder if the men there aren't actually real men, like they're made, sort of conjured or created beings. I don't really know what the purpose would be in that. Maybe, as you said, it would be really hard to get men to actually be comfortable around the wyverns and breeding them. Or it would be too hard to keep it a secret and keep them controlled. So they, created kind of an army of dummies, so to speak, to care for the wyverns. I'm not sure, but there is definitely something funky going on with the men.
I agree.
And their blood and disappearing and all that. And so I'm going to be on high alert for that, as Manon probably is too. I hate that every time it comes up, Manon's like, but she didn't have time to worry about that. She would think on it later. And I'm like, no, bitch, how about you think about it right now?
It's so similar to like how Celaena was in Throne of Glass and stuff. And we're like, what do you mean you don't care? Like,
yes.
you should fucking care. This is weird.
I care very deeply. Why do you not care? Maybe you should think about that right now. Or they're like, she pushed the thoughts aside. I'm like, don't push them aside. Put them in the forefront of your brain and sit there until you figure it out.
Exactly. I totally agree. Yeah, I don't know if we have enough information at this point to figure out what's going on, but I think everything you brought up is important to know. At this point, I'm kind of under the impression that Manon specifically is much more sensitive to this than anybody else. I mean, from the very beginning that she was there, she was questioning why nobody else seemed to pick up on this weird smell. She's been the only one that she knows of so far who's noticed it. And she thought about it. And then, as we just stated, just decided that it wasn't important enough to think about from here on out.
Focus on that later.
But it would not be far-fetched at all for the king to definitely be controlling the men that are stationed at the Farian Gap and manipulating them with the magic in some capacity, right? Because he's been doing it to everybody else, basically, that he's in close contact with.
Yeah, agreed. There's definitely something sketchy going on there.
100%. Manon continues approaching Abraxos, taking 3 steps, one for each face of their goddess, maiden, mother, crone, and says to him, I am Manon Blackbeak, heir to the Blackbeak clan, and you are mine. Do you understand? Despite the mocking snorts of the men, Manon sees Abraxos lower his head ever so slightly as if to indicate he understood. She continues speaking to him, stating, You are Abraxos. I gave you that name because he is the great beast, the serpent who wrapped the world in his coils, and who will devour it at the very end when the 3-faced goddess bids him to. You are Abraxos, and you are mine. I did find that a little bit interesting because it gives us some insight into, I guess, the creation or just more of the spiritual beliefs of the witches. In this case, it felt more world building, so I didn't flag anything about it in terms of foreshadowing or anything in the same way I hopped all over Mala, Lady of Learning, Fire
and Light.
Goddess. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. It's some good world building on the witches, but as of right now, I don't see it being any kind of foreshadowing for future events. To more just kind of context for the witches' belief system.
In a gesture that absolutely melted my heart, Abraxos steps toward Manon, who reaches out her hand and presses his snout into her palm. Then we get some details about his physical appearance. Manon notes his gray hide was warm, soft, and thick like worn leather. He has some variation in his coloring that includes dark green, brown, and black colors as well. His numerous scars mar his skin like stripes, and his yellow teeth definitely need some dental work. Despite his mangled body, Manon realizes that they weren't the markings of a victim. They were the trophies of a survivor. Abraxos was a warrior who'd had all the odds stacked against him and survived. Aww. She then commands the overseers and the handlers to get out and leave the saddle, warning, if you bring a whip in here again, I'll use it on you myself. Once alone, she wonders about Abraxos, who seemed inherently different from the other wyverns the king had bred because he could understand her words and expressions. She wonders if he could comprehend those things, he could possibly teach the other mounts of the 13. It was a small edge, but an edge that could make them wing later and make them invincible against the king's enemies. This does make me wonder how wyverns communicate and what their group structure is like. I want to know, how will he go about communicating what Manon tells him to the other wyverns? And will the other wyverns understand him? I guess they would, but
it's a real question of how is their hierarchy constructed? Is there an alpha dragon that then they all listen to? And I have to imagine, any other kind of sentient creatures, they have a way of sensing, I guess, authority in a group. So my question is, how will Abraxos be able to do that? Because as they have discussed a couple of times, even flying with Abraxos is a risk right now because he's been a bait beast for years. So all the other wyverns' instincts will be to attack him because they're used to him being bait. And so I am curious to see how that goes when they all start flying together.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I wonder if they can also tell between the witches. I'm wondering if that's going to be a factor in it, because each of the witches is connected to a wyvern, and all the witches already know to follow Manon, you know? So I wonder if the wyverns will kind of by default follow the command of their riders, so to speak, and then therefore acknowledge Abraxos as the main head honcho.
Abraxos, the head honcho.
I love saying that. Head honcho. King Brannon, head honcho stag. Abraxos, head honcho wyvern. Next, we get a sequence of commands and questions from Manon that have me convinced that below her extra crispy exterior, she has a soft little heart, at least when it comes to Abraxos. She tells him she would be putting the saddle on him if he wants to get out of the shithole. Then she would have iron spikes for his tail commissioned, as well as iron fangs. She tells him it's going to hurt and you're going to want to kill the men who put them in, but you're going to let them do it, because if you don't, then you will rot down here for the rest of your life. Once that is all done, you and I are going to learn how to fly, and then we'll stay in this kingdom red. Ooh, that gave me chills to read. And I love it so much that she's going to outfit him with special equipment, and he's going to be so fierce, you know?
I like that it matches her own because she has iron teeth and nails, and now Abraxos has the same thing. And I don't know why this line really stuck with me, but when Manon first sees Titus and she's thinking how she has to have him, and she would have no other beast than one whose darkness called to her own. And that really stuck with me. And I feel like when you combine that line with the force of fate that pulled her towards Abraxos, I just feel like Abraxos and Manon are meant to be mirrors of each other in a lot of ways. And so when I get more of Abraxos' personality, I'm always like, yeah, that kind of matches Manon's. And I think that's going to continue to develop as we read.
It does, but he kind of doesn't. He's very independent, and he reminds me of a cat, honestly. He's just kind of like...
very cat-like.
Sometimes I wonder if he's judging her a little bit. He kind of pushes back. He pushes the boundaries of what he's allowed to do with Manon. He's kind of like a teenager, too, in a way. He's pushing back, talking back in a way.
He's a little troublemaker.
5 days later, Abraxos was fully fitted with his new tail spikes and teeth, even if he did growl and almost bite off the arm of the physician digging out his rotted teeth. Manon stayed by him during all of his plastic surgery, telling him stories of hunting down Crocan witches. She had missed riding lessons with the 13 and was well aware that her window for getting Abraxos airborne was shrinking. Manon, Astrid, and Sorrel discussed the pitiful dynamics of the youngest coven of Blackbeaks, whose leader was panting on the ground, having been thrown down by an inferior. She then instructs them to give the young witch 2 days to figure it out, but to have Vesta take her out tonight to wherever she'd been going to torment the men in the Northern Fang, clearly indicating she was aware that the Blackbeaks were involved with them. So in my notes, I had originally written that I wondered if they were responsible for the missing men, but then obviously we just had a discussion with this, and now I'm like, I don't know if I can say that with certainty. Now I'm questioning it.
Good, as am I.
Astrid starts, and Manon warns them to keep the death toll down, since they didn't need a mutiny from the mortals to deal with. Okay, see, but now I'm confused. Because if they weren't dying and the witches weren't responsible, why would the mortals...
Well, there's still men disappearing. Like, that part is true. But then Manon also notices that they're all giving Vesta the wink, wink, see you later smile. So they can't be disappearing if they're coming back the next day and making goo-goo eyes at Vesta and Astrid. That's why I'm confused.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll just have to...
Exactly. That's how I'm like, exactly.
Manon briefly thinks about how neither Vesta nor Astrid had reported anything about the men tasting strange. And As we discussed earlier, we're just going to continue noting that because there has to be a reason that only Manon seems to be noticing this strange smell phenomenon. Sorrel, who had served as the grounding force between Manon's ice and Astrid's flame, obliges her command as Astrid complains that the only witches having fun right now were the green-eyed demon twins, Phaline and Fallon, who are currently engaged in demonstrating knife-throwing exercises with inferiors as targets. It's just crazy to me. I was like, whoa, what the hell?
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a good way to build coven loyalty and camaraderie.
Yeah, not typically speaking, but I guess it is pretty on brand for the witches based off of what we learned about that.
That's fair. Totally fair.
Manon asked for an update on the cousin witches, Etta and... Did you say Eda? Etta? It's Etta?
I said Etta. It could be Eda. I think it's Etta and Briar.
Okay.
Again, if they become more prominent, I'll remember the pronunciation for their name.
Yeah,
but until then,
okay.
I don't give a shit.
Manon asked for an update on the cousin witches Etta and Briar, also known as the Shadows, who'd been training since infancy to blend into any sliver of darkness and listen in. Astrid informs them they would report to her later that night. Then we get some information about the physical appearance of the Shadow cousins. They both had the same moon-white hair as Manon, but they dyed it solid black to help them blend in. They are at least 80 years old, but probably closer to Manon's age. They rarely spoke and never laughed, and their sole source of entertainment seemed to be sneaking up on people. Predictably, they'd chosen 2 onyx wyverns as their mounts. Manon informs Astrid and Sorrel they were to be present for the report from the Shadows, and before she turns away, she tells them, "I'll be airborne with Abraxos in a week, and then we'll be flying as one." Manon thinks it was a lie, but they believed her anyway. So I was wondering what she meant by that. Is she trying to say she doesn't feel very confident that Abraxos is going to be ready to fly? But she's faking it.
Manon is faking it till she makes it because, I mean, even the overseers don't think that he can fly. So I think Manon is like really like, oh God, please. She's really praying to the 3-faced goddess that's going to work out for her because right now it ain't looking so good.
You know, I was thinking about this randomly. How heavy are these iron teeth and spikes? I know like they're big wyverns and stuff, but I mean, it's metal and I would imagine it's kind of heavy to make a solid iron spike and put it in your tail. That's like a lead weight, basically.
So I wonder how heavy the normal spikes were anyway. So maybe it'll be good because it'll help them build up muscle control.
Okay. Fair.
But probably heavy.
Yeah. Anyways, that concludes chapter 27. Moving on to chapter 28. It has been several more days for Celaena, who had been taken by Rowan to visit a commune of healers where the finest healers in the world learned, taught, and worked. The compound was situated on the border between the Fae and Moral World and was accessible to anyone who could reach it. It was one of the few good things Maeve had done. Celaena recalls begging her mother as a child to go visit, but ultimately they never visited, and she only got vague promises they would someday take a trip to the Torre Chesme in the southern continent, where many of the teachers had been taught by the Fae. We learned in TOG and then also the Tab Healer story that Celaena had once wanted to be a healer and had dreamed of dwelling in the fabled cream-colored towers of the Torre. So even if it's not the Torre Chesme, I am sure that this experience really meant a lot to her. Celaena then revels in the opportunity guided by the head healer and could have spent a whole month there, but they could only spend half a day since Rowan had wanted to get home before nightfall, and Celaena's inability to shift had slowed them down. Though she had enjoyed the trip, she wondered if Rowan had just brought her there to make her feel bad about the life she'd fallen into, and it made her quiet on their journey back. They get to the fortress, only to get back out on the road at dawn the following morning. Celaena quickly stuffs down some food and tea from the kitchens and then meets Rowan at her room, where he was standing with a small pack of clothes for her. Celaena notes he shouldered it and guessed that meant he was in a good mood because she had fully expected to play pack mule on their next trip. They make it outside past the fortress walls and wardstones, and once in the mist-shrouded trees, he tells her, "Shift and let's go. It's 20 miles. We're running. Each way." Celaena's knees wobble at the thought, and I'm sure she was recalling those dreadful sand dune runs in the desert with Ansel, but she instead asks, "Where are we going?" Rowan informs her they were heading to the nearby town of a neighboring fortress where another dead body had been dumped in the same area with the same MO as the other bodies they'd found. He goes on to tell her he needed her help since it would be easier for the mortals to talk to her, which delights Celaena as she replies, "Is that a compliment?" Celaena goes on to state even if she wanted to, she still couldn't shift on command. But Rowan insists she needed to test her limits in her Fae form and that it was unacceptable that another dead body had been found. He goads her a bit, but Celaena feels a pressure and heat build beneath her skin, as the thought about the dead bodies and the horrible creature that she wanted to destroy. She realizes he had manipulated her into tapping into her power, but he says, "Let it be a blade. Aelin, if you cannot find the peace, then at least hone the anger that guides you to the shift. Embrace and control it. It is not your enemy." Celaena is still fearful of what could happen and remembers how Erebin had done everything he could to make her hate her heritage, to fear it, what he'd done to her, what she'd allowed herself to become.
Yes, I have thoughts about this. Okay, tell me what you think first.
Well, obviously, first off, obligatory fuck
Fuck
Erebin
Hamel.
But, okay, is this text confirmation that Erebin knew she was Fae? It seems to me like it's leaning towards yes, but it's kind of ambiguous enough to not 100% be true. But I feel like it is kind of confirming that he did know who she was and that she could indeed shift and become Fae.
Okay, I'm so glad you asked because I had the exact same question. As always, the question we've asked many, many times is, did he know about her powers? Obviously, he knows who she is. She's a very noteworthy person. Everyone in Erilea knows who she is, right? I thought a lot about it, and I still think that no, that he doesn't know about her powers or her ability to shift, that this is meant to describe her Fae ancestry and or being from Terrasen. Because, as we know, there's many published books about the family houses and family trees going back generations, right? Dorian looks at those books, Chaol looks at those books. And so it would be pretty common knowledge of the ancestry and lineage of any of the heirs to Belissan, Fenharrow, Terrasen, etc. And so it would be common knowledge that she has Fae ancestry. Just like it's probably common knowledge that Dorian is descendant of Elena and Gavin Halliard, right? To me, you could read it either way, that he knows about her ability to shift. And I'm not going to rehash my normal argument, which is I think magic was gone and she couldn't shift anyway, so there's no way he'd know. Or you could read it like it's just meant to describe the ancestral link she has to being a Fae. It's hard to tell. Honestly, you could go either way. My second kind of burning question is, what does Erebin have against the Fae and ancestry and lineage? Like, why did he teach her to hate it? What's his beef with the Fae?
That's why I kind of wonder it goes deeper and maybe he does know. Because,
I don't know.
I mean, we know Erebin was a sadistic asshole outside of what he did to Celaena. But to Celaena in particular, I mean, that was, really shitty. And I don't know. It's another one of those things where you're trying to figure out, why did he need to destroy her identity, sense of self and identity so thoroughly? Like, why would it really matter to her? Especially even if he did know she had Fae ancestry, but because magic was gone, she couldn't shift or whatever, then if he didn't realize that she was gifted with powers, again, why go through that extensive of a process to make her forget who she is and make her hate everything about her ancestry? I was convinced against the idea that Erebin knew that she had power and could shift. But I'm starting to go back in that direction where I think he may have known. It just seems unlikely that you're going to end up in Terrasen territory and snatch Aelin, whose parents, okay, also Terrasen, it seems like everybody knew that there was power in and around Terrasen before magic disappeared.
Okay.
So then how would it make sense for people to not, especially because all the random stuff, like who's to say he didn't hear about, now that we know that Aelin burned some books and stuff and has had flare-ups with her power, who's to say that news didn't spread to other plates,
Yeah.
or like people didn't somehow figure it out.
You know what? You're absolutely right, because even in that dream sequence, they make a comment about basically that had been a debate since she was born. This was a well-known thing. I think that statement would seem to indicate that it's probably, it may not be widespread, but it's definitely not a secret. She can't keep it a secret. That's the problem, is that everyone
Right.
knows. I mean, if Maeve and freaking Wendlyn knows, then probably
Yeah.
a lot of people on the continent know. So now, as you were having that revelation, I was like, oh shit, you're right. He probably does know. So, okay, I guess, you know, it would be really fucking helpful if we had gotten the story about how Erebin found her, the day that Terrasen fell, and why he decided to keep her. And if we could just have a little download, that would resolve a lot of my questions.
I'm starting to feel like there's something. That bitch must have known something. Okay. And he had a very specific reason for wanting to take Aelin.
I'm telling you, I think he was the assassin.
Oh,
remember?
yeah.
I thought he was the one who was hired. But then there was that weird thing about like she smelled the weird smell, and then was it actually, I don't know. You know, it'd be great if we knew the story. That would be really great.
That's true. Yeah, if we could freaking catch up with Erebin Hamel again, or just get her memory about that night. But I do suspect that the reason we haven't heard about it yet is because there's something
big. There's a bigger
larger going. Yes, there's something larger going on about that night. So.
I think that's an excellent point, because we've gotten so much backstory and information, and it's like that seems like a pretty key piece. And why have we still not gotten that? Why? And I think you're right that it's building up to a big revelation involving Aelin and her powers, involving Erebin, involving a lot of key players. And so I agree. I think I'm really hoping we find out in this book. I don't think I can stand another book without it.
Let's hope so. Anyways, to summarize that thought, fuck Erebin Hamel.
What she said.
Rowan continues to encourage her, stating, don't ask for it, don't wish for it, take it. You are not most people, and I think you like it that way. If it's a darker set of emotions that will help you shift on command, then that's what we'll use. There might come a day when you find that anger doesn't work, or when it is a crutch. But for now, it was the common denominator those times you shifted. Own it. Celaena realizes he was right, and even if she didn't want to think about it more than that, she had been angry for so long, so she lets the anger anchor her. She finds herself brushing along a veil shimmering with light. She realizes it felt more like reaching in rather than down, and that she had to command it. She growls silently and punches through the veil, and finally shifts. Eee! Rowan immediately begins moving around her, yanking on her side and pinching her, a wild invitation in his eyes. But having studied his movements, she waited patiently until he shot left, and then she whirled to slam down his arm and whack him upside the head. He stops dead in his tracks as Celaena smirks at him. He bares his teeth in a feral, petrifying grin and says, oh, you'd better run now. But Celaena takes off into the trees.
Love that. I love that.
I know.
So good.
I know. This, I think, was my favorite set of chapters. Just reading about when she shifts and how she feels so free and everything.
I know. It's really nice.
Celaena runs faster than she ever had, barely adjusting enough in her altered body to avoid rocks and trees, as she headed south per Rowan's instructions. Her anger begins to subside as the silver and white streak of Rowan trails her through the forest. She tests her senses that signaled where trees were without seeing them, and takes in the earthy smell of the oak and moss. Soon, Celaena decided she wanted to go faster than the wind itself, as she and her body demanded more. Her immortal body was singing as she let its rhythms fall into place. She could have flown, could have scoured for the sudden surge of ecstasy in her blood, the sheer freedom granted by the marvel of creation that was her body. Rowan continues his attempts to catch her, but she whirls away from each lunge, letting the moves she'd honed as an assassin blend into the instinct of her fey body. She wonders how had she been afraid of this body for so long. Even her soul felt looser, as if it had been locked up and buried and was only now starting to shake free. Not joy, perhaps not ever, but a glimmer of what she had been before grief had decimated her so thoroughly. Rowan catches up to her again, and she realizes that Rowan was playing. And as he glances at her, she could have sworn that she saw his eyes alight with a glimmer of that same feral contentment. She could have sworn he was smiling. I hate to say it, but I am unfortunately easily persuaded. I mean, come on. This was a really cute moment, okay? And I know you're probably not going to agree yet, but I thought it was cute as fuck. And more than that, it was really nice to see Celaena just happy and free finally after so much of her life had been, as she put it, decimated by grief. And I can just like feel the soul and the happiness she must feel to just be free running as a fae in the forest, okay? She's just a fairy now. She's just a fae. She was a fairy.
She was a fairy.
Okay. Yeah, literally.
So my first response to what you said is nee about Rowan, okay? And my second thing is you're absolutely right. It was nice to see Celaena feel, I don't know if joy is a strong word, but feel something other than grief and despair. And so that's nice. My favorite part was when she whacked Rowan upside the head. That was pure gold.
That. Yes.
There was, I will say, some nice, I'll say like vaguely flirtatious tension, but yeah, I still think that Rowan sucks. So I said what I said.
Well, 20 miles later, they finally stop and Celaena realizes her magic had once tried to overpower her, but instead it was warm and calm and slumbering now. Celaena briefly reflects on if her face speed would have made a difference the night Nehemia died.
I had a thought about specifically when she is thinking about Nehemia, and there's a quote here that I think is kind of important. So the context for that is she's thinking about her fate body and how fast she could run. And she starts thinking about if she had been able to run that fast the night Nehemia died, right? If you recall, there's like this really descriptive scene of her running through Rifthold trying to make it back to the castle. The quote is, "It wouldn't have made a difference. Nehemia had orchestrated every step in her own destruction and would have found another way." I think that this is a really important realization for Celaena to have, knowing that there was nothing she could have done and she would have never been able to save Nehemia, that Nehemia orchestrated it. Because Celaena's had these fleeting thoughts of like, Nehemia was responsible, Nehemia set it up. But I think this moment is where Celaena accepts that Nehemia orchestrated it and that even if Celaena had managed to stop grief, Nehemia would have found another way. And that's exactly what she thinks to herself. Like, Nehemia would have made it happen no matter what. And of course, I don't think she's worked through it all. But I think this is the first step to her working through her grief and her guilt over her role, or I guess her lack thereof, of inability to actually save Nehemia. And I think that's a really important next step for her, is to recognize that it was circumstances out of her control. And not only did it not just happen, it quite literally was planned. And it was Nehemia's plan. Now, there's a secondary issue of, I think Celaena will continue to feel guilty because the reason Nehemia felt the need to do that is because Celaena refused to take a stand. That's a whole separate issue, right? But I do think that this is the first time I feel like Celaena's had a mature thought about that situation. And I hope it means that she's going to be able to start moving past it.
I hope so too. I agree. Obviously, we know that there was nothing she could have done. And even if she had saved her that night, Nehemia would have just
found another
way to kill herself.
She would have, yeah.
So, yeah, I totally agree that hopefully she can forgive herself for that aspect of it. But I agree that, like you said, I think Celaena still has a lot to work through in terms of her accepting her bigger fate and her larger role in the plot now. It is not just about her. There is a lot more that she needs to accept, I think, that she is going to be responsible for. Shortly after, they enter the red-roofed town and quickly learn that the humans there had little interest in talking to two Fae visitors. She suspects that despite Rowan being calm and borderline cheerful, still looked like death incarnate, and this unfortunately earned them many shut windows. They get close to nothing about missing people or livestock, and it generally seemed that they didn't appreciate Fae and demi-Fae poking into their business. Celaena reflects on the facts and figures, consistently selecting someone who wouldn't be missed or noticed and must be sentient enough to know who to target. The demi-Fae has to be a message, but what? Why leave bodies in the first place? A shopkeeper closes curtains on Celaena, who had been looking at some dresses, and she asks Rowan, "You're used to this, I assume?" He responds, "A lot of Fae who venture into mortal lands have earned themselves a reputation for taking what they want. It went unchecked for too many years, but even though our laws are stricter now, the fear remains." Celaena wonders if this was a criticism of Maeve, but she goes on to ask who enforced the laws, and if the 5 other Fae warriors helped Rowan. Turns out, Rowan is the chief overseer for keeping the Fae in line with the humans. Any offenders were either killed if the situation called for it, or taken to Doranel for Maeve to handle. He also tells her he only saw the other Fae warriors if it was needed, but otherwise Maeve had them serve her as she saw fit. Celaena notes that he adds, "It is an honor to be a warrior serving her inner circle," and she wonders why he had felt the need to say that. Celaena catches a whiff of chocolate on the air then, and she hatches a plan that is just so Celaena-coded. It is hilarious. She beelines straight for the confectionery, where she gives the confectioner a winning smile and thinks over her rotting corpse. Was she letting these people get away with shutting curtains in her face, or letting them think she was here to plunder? Nehemia had never once let the preening, bigoted idiots in Rifthold shut her out of any store, dining room, or household. It was time for Celaena to do what she does best, being the luxurious shopping princess who would charm the ever-loving hell out of these villagers.
This really was made for her, luxurious shopping princess. I loved
back
it.
in her element.
Yes, I know. And she was like, "Is that chocolate?" That is so Celaena, man.
The plan works wonderfully, and soon people were opening up their shops to them, eager to chat so long as they sold something. Celaena pops into a messenger's guild to mail a letter where she asks if the novices had been hired by anyone of interest. I was wondering, that was just part of a ploy, right? Or do you think she was actually sending a real letter to somebody?
Oh, just a ploy.
Oh, okay. I was like a little bit like, who is she sending a letter to? But then I was like, wait, she's probably just
pretending.
Doing it. Yeah, okay. They spend the rest of the day talking with everyone in the village, Rowan dutifully carrying every shopping bag and box, and though they didn't get any information, Celaena reckoned that was good because it meant the villagers hadn't been lying. I don't know why, but the scene felt so similar to Celaena and Chaol's ruse when they were first investigating Archer and Rifthold. You know, like Rowan's demeanor seems very similar to Chaol.
Just like I will go along with this because I must.
Yeah. Not super happy to be there necessarily. Meanwhile, Celaena's having a grand old time.
Oh, totally.
The innkeeper, seeing they had spent so much money, suddenly had a suite available, but she politely refuses, thinking they may attract the wrong crowd, and instead they stroll back out into the forest to sleep under a canopy of leaves.
All I have to say is that I love this scene. It was so funny. I love this shit. It was a nice reprieve from where we are in the story, because every scene with Celaena and Rowan is like they hate each other, they scream each other, Celaena's broken, Rowan's mean. It's not like they had a lot of personal connection or anything, but it was just nice for them to do something different and actually see Celaena do something other than think about how broken she is and be mean to everyone around her. Honestly.
Yes.
And the second thing is, all I have to say is Rowan is such a fuddy-duddy who doesn't eat sweets ever. Like, that is so... I don't eat sweets. I'm like, you're too good. You're too good for that. No wonder nobody likes you, okay?
Wait, what is this term? A funny duddy?
A fuddy-duddy.
What is...
It's like a 50s.
Never heard of that.
You've never heard fuddy-duddy? I swear.
No.
You know, let me see. Now I'm like, okay, yeah, fuddy-duddy. It's a thing. Okay, a person who's old-fashioned and fussy.
I mean, that does make sense for Rowan.
Yeah. Where did it? Oh, this is funny. I just Googled it real quick to make sure. And it's flagged as derogatory, informal. Apparently, it's rude to call someone a fuddy-duddy. I don't know why, but I'm like, as we're talking about this, I'm having this memory of a Disney movie. I cannot remember all the context, but I feel like there's this girl who moves to this town and she can't shake the feeling. I feel like there's like this 50s girl who's haunting her and she's a ghost because something tragic happened to her and she like tries to figure it out. But the word fuddy-duddy is used in that movie. And now this is going to bother me so much and I'm going to have to Google it. Not right now, obviously. I'm just going to make a quick little note to myself because I feel like a crazy person right now. And I'm like, what? God, it was like Susie Q or something like that. Oh, what? No. Oh, it is called Susie Q.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I cannot help you. I have nothing to add. Did not ring any bells. So
nothing? Nobody?
Nope.
Oh my gosh. Yes. A boy grieving the recent death of his father comes to befriend the ghost of a young girl haunting his house, learning that the ghost, nicknamed Susie Q, is still coming to terms with the car crash that took her life in the 1950s. Yes, this is totally a real thing. Okay, I'm not crazy, but I'm pretty sure that's where I heard the word fuddy-duddy. And now I'm like, I need to rewatch this movie. Like, what? Okay, anyway, sorry. Way off track. Way off track. I'm going to bring it back now. But Rowan is a fuddy-duddy.
Yes,
he's a fuddy-duddy, and I stand by that.
He really is. Honestly, him and Chaol do kind of have some parallels between them and their personalities. I feel like they're really so serious all the time. And I'm like, when are you going to loosen up?
Yes, I've had that thought so many times. Yes. I'm like, quit being a baby. Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh my God. Okay.
Anyways, we transition to a dream Celaena was having about her childhood, and it's definitely very interesting, to say the least. She recalls that her mother had always called her Fireheart, and to her people.
Oh, why did that make me want to weep?
It was really cute.
I like Fireheart. Like, what is such a cute nickname? Oh my God. This dream sequence kind of had me fucked up, honestly.
It was really interesting. I think it was nice to get just more of an idea of what Evelyn and Ro were like. And then obviously it gives some context to what's going on with Celaena when she was younger and everything.
Yeah.
So her mother had called her Fireheart, and to her people, she represented a tremendous power that would keep them safe and raise their kingdom to even greater heights. A power that was a gift or a weapon. As she got older, Celaena had inherited her mother's looks and her father's volatile temper, which began to cause people to ask questions by rulers in kingdoms far from their own. On this particular night, she knew everyone would hear of the event that had occurred. On this night that she's recalling, she was supposed to be asleep, but she hadn't been able to, so she listened to her parents converse through the cracked door of her bedroom. In the conversation between Evelyn and Ro, it becomes evident that Celaena had accidentally burned books in the library, likely quite a few from the way her parents discussed the issue. Evelyn had insisted they try and blame someone else out of fear. Maeve and others will hunt her for this power. But Ro argues that ultimately Celaena needed training and friends because the only person she had right now was Adian. And without either, that's when she'll turn into what they are afraid of.
I just want to point out here that we had speculated on why Evelyn was hell-bent on keeping Celaena away from people. This was in the very first episode of Heir of Fire when Celaena meets Maeve, and there's that dialogue about Evelyn. And I feel like this gives us another puzzle piece to the big picture, is that especially when Evelyn says this is because she's going to be hunted, Ro, for her whole life. Maeve and others will hunt her for this power, and then she gets cut off. But I mean, I think that's pretty explicit language, right? Not only is it not just about Maeve, but this is such a rare and powerful gift that she is genuinely concerned that people will try to take Aelin and use her as a tool. And I think that's really important to remember, especially in the context of why Celaena herself fears her power. Because even her own parents are afraid of it and are afraid that it will be used as a weapon against Celaena, or Celaena will be weaponized to hurt people. And so with that context, I think it does give a little more understanding to why she is so hell-bent on not using her powers.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it also helps us understand part of probably why Maeve wants her is because gift that strong, exactly what they had speculated. They could use her as a very powerful weapon for whatever cause they force her to be a part of, I guess, to some extent. Adian, who was also in Celaena's room at the time, hisses, "I'm not a child," but Celaena shushes him. We learn that Adian is 5 years older than Celaena and was the only other child that was her friend. The other children keeping away as if they could smell her differences. Evelyn and Ro continued their discussion, and Ro suggests they send her to school, like Elid's parents had done. And if we recall, Elid is the daughter and heir of the former Lord and Lady of Parenth, who had disappeared during the King of Adarlan's conquests. But Evelyn insists no schools, especially not the magic school that was close to the border with Adarlan.
I know we've said this many times. Another mention of Elid is important to me. Once is an introduction, twice is a coincidence. If it comes up a third time, that is purposeful with intent. So if Elid gets mentioned again, because that's twice in a very short span of page count.
Yes.
And it makes me feel like that is important, especially because the first mention of her indicates that her fate is unknown. No one really knows where she is or what happened. A lot of children of Terrasen were hiding out. So I also, in that part of the conversation when they're talking, this is a separate thing, but when Ro is like, why do you think Celaena loves books so much? And it's because she is so lonely and doesn't have any friends. And that breaks my heart. I just had to say that because when he brings that up and I'm like, those are her dearest friends. And it just, it gives a lot of context for, I think, Celaena's entire life. She's always felt very lonely and isolated. And so again, another kind of character building element where it makes sense why she's so devastated by the loss of Nehemia and why she's so devastated by Ansel's betrayal and the escapement in the desert. And so I like this insight into what her childhood was like because it helps me understand her better. And so all of that, every time I'm like, she's just had such a hard life. It makes me so sad. It makes me want to cry.
It does help you have grace for a lot of her less
desirable,
nice, less desirable, less nice behaviors that she has a tendency to frequently display. But you know, obviously it's pretty apparent that this is it's her little shell. She's like that because it's how she keeps herself safe from being disappointed or hurt, I guess, by people she lets in.
Yeah.
But okay, so I was wondering, the magic school, is this like a Hogwarts for the Fae situation? I was curious about that. And then I was wondering if their mentioning of a lead and how they say a lead had been sent away to the school, was he referring to this magic school?
Oh.
Or is it just a different school? You know, if it is the magic school, then that
what kind of magic she got? Yeah,
a lead has some kind of magic. So,
ooh, yeah. My best guess would be that, I guess not necessarily just for Fae, but any magic builders. Because remember, there were a lot of people who had various forms of magic. And I mean, for a lot of people, some of their forms of magic probably could potentially be dangerous. Untrained children with magic could be a menace to society. So I feel like there had to be some kind of educational structure to help them learn control and how to use it effectively, especially because a lot of it could be helpful to society, like encouraging plants to grow and weather and all of that too. So I think that's probably what it was like. I do think that's interesting, the connection, because I think Rose says Cal and Marion are thinking about sending her to school, but is it a magic school or is it not? So that's really interesting. That is a very good catch.
I guess we'll see. We just need to see if a lead comes up again. And if she does, then I think we know she's going to be a prominent character at that point.
Yeah.
Adian growls out that it shouldn't be a big deal. She burned some books and adds, when we're older, maybe we'll burn it to the ground together. Okay, Adian. And Celaena knew he meant that because it was their bond, marked by blood and scent and something else she couldn't place. A tether as strong as the one that bound her to her parents, stronger in some ways. I did find that description kind of interesting because we know that they have the blood oath. But I don't know. It kind of seems like there's something beyond that. Like, is she just talking about the fact that this tether is suggesting the magic of the blood oath, perhaps?
I don't know. I had the exact same quote marked. And I just really wrote that I found it interesting the way it's described. I mean, to me, there's clearly a familial link. There's they were raised together link. There's a magic element. But I do wonder, it does seem like there's something stronger. Now, I'm going to say this only because I have to say it because I think it's at least worth speculating about, but I don't think this is the case. What if they're mates? And that's why there's such a strong bond or connection, because especially the something else she couldn't place, a tether as strong as the one that bound her to her parents, stronger in some ways. And usually when you describe that kind of pull to someone, it's because in a lot of fantasy books, especially when there's Fae, it's their mate. But that seems kind of weird because I don't really think there's going to be a romantic interest that develops. But it's possible. So I just have to say it because that's how it reads to me, although I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't believe that Anian and Aelin are going to end up being mates in this story. That
I don't
seems a
think
little
so.
too close.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know. And we
Oh.
talked about last episode in a lot of fantasy series, especially in monarchies like cousins or,
Right.
distant relatives. But I don't think that's where we're going in this story. But we've
Yeah.
talked a couple of times about Adian's very, very intense, almost too intense devotion to her.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting, especially the way it's described here.
Yes. He seems more like a brother than a cousin, which,
Yes.
I mean, at this point, it seems like he basically is her brother, more
Right.
or less. But yeah, there's something else, something deeper, it seems like, than just the fact that it's a blood oath that connects them.
Agreed.
Before Celaena could answer him, the door opens and Evelyn and Ro appear in front of them. Adian gets the cue to leave, and Celaena tells her father, "I don't want to go away to school." Ro walks toward her bed, and Celaena notes, a warrior prince, she heard people call him, who would one day make a mighty king. She sometimes thought her father had no interest in being king, especially on days when he took her up into the Staghorns and let her wander through Oakwald in search of the Lord of the Forest. He never seemed happier than at those times, and always seemed a little sad to go back to Orinth. I'm assuming the Lord of the Forest is referring to
Brandon.
Okay, yeah. Head
Has
stag,
to be right. Yeah.
Head honcho
Okay.
Brandon.
Head honcho Brandon.
Ro reassures her she wasn't being sent to school, but they go on to discuss the book burning incident in the library. Celaena apologizes and says, "I wish I was like to others. I don't want to be queen." Her father says, "I know. Sleep now. We'll talk about it in the morning." But Celaena knew they wouldn't, because she knew there was no escaping her fate, even though she sometimes prayed to the gods that she could. She lay down, again nonetheless, letting him kiss her head and murmur goodnight. Then, as her parents leave, she could have sworn that tears gleamed on her mother's pale face. I was wondering, do you think her parents knew something was going to happen to them? I kind of got the feeling, just because of this last line with her mom's tears, and then, just the mentioning of fate again. But of course, we don't know if this was the same night or anything. I don't know. Just,
oh, no, it is.
Seem...
It is, because
it was
remember, she says, but they would discuss it tomorrow, but she knew they wouldn't.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
I'm going to say that in a broader sense, I think they were worried that something would happen, because Evelyn said something like, "We're not sending her to that school on the border of Otterland because we don't know what they're planning." So I think they know something is coming. Honestly, this to me reads as just an emotional mother who's worried about her child and her future and her fate. And we also strongly speculate that Evelyn knows more about the world and how Aelin fits into her. She's very scared of Maeve. She wants to tuck her away. And I think she's just really worried for Aelin and how her life is going to turn out. And so I think they definitely knew something could happen. I don't think they had like a distinct, we know something's going to happen very, very soon.
Okay. In either case, very sad. So Celaena jolts awake from the dream, figuring it had been the odd smells from the bodies that had triggered it, but Rowan tells her she needed to start their morning fire if she wanted breakfast. She holds out a hand toward the logs, but Rowan says pointing is a crutch. Your mind can direct the flames just fine, followed by another look that said, light the fire now. She begins to carve out a small bit of magic, which gets the logs to smoke, but remembering the odd dream, she loses control and lets out too much magic, incinerating the entire surrounding area.
Whoops.
But real talk, how did he not get burned by the fire?
Like, I don't know. Because there's all these comments about like Celaena could have burned herself, whatever. And I'm like, it seems like it's always setting a fire just, a few yards that way. It does make me kind of wonder.
I don't know. Guess he was fine though. So Rowan puts out the fire and says, "At least you didn't panic and shift back into your human form," which Celaena supposed was a compliment. She felt the magic had released like a thrown punch, and the pressure under her skin had lessened, but she just nods, realizing shifting was to be the least of her problems right now. I would imagine that for Celaena, she probably would need to use her magic to burn some of it off, because she's just so powerful. I think Rowan had said that for the super gifted Fae, they would need to warm up their magic to get to the strongest part of it and use it at full force. So I feel like that's probably also the case for Celaena.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
But that concludes chapter 28. Now moving on to chapter 29. It's time for some inner thoughts from Sorsha, who has not stopped thinking about that kiss with Dorian since it happened. Despite this, she continued seeing Dorian daily to give him his dose of treacle, which they decided to refer to as a contraceptive tonic, since no one would bat an eye at that considering his reputation. Sorsha enters Dorian's room, announcing she had found a better tasting combination. Mint this time. Dorian prowls toward her, grips her hand, and asks, "You understand the risks, and yet you're still helping me. Why?" She responds, "It's the right thing. I don't know what you want me to say." Dorian leans in to say, "I just want to thank you for seeing me and not running." Sorsha was burning for our charming prince, but she remembers Amethy's reminder that there were plenty of beautiful women here and anything more than a flirtation would end poorly, since he was the crown prince and she was nobody. So she says, "Send word about how this one works for you," before turning around and leaving his room. Once outside, she leans against the wall to steady her thundering heart and faces an inner conflict about how, despite understanding that she would only survive the road ahead if she continued to be unnoticed, reliable, and quiet, she did very much, in fact, want to be noticed by the prince. Then the door swings open, and Dorian stands facing her, solemn and weary. Sorsha decides it could all go to hell tomorrow, but she had to know what it was like to belong to someone, to be wanted and cherished. So she grabs the lapel. How do you say that word? Lapels? Lapels?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Lapels. I love you so much.
She grabs the lapels of his tunic and pulls him toward her to kiss him fiercely. Cute! I actually wasn't sure she would actually give in to her feelings, but it seems like Sorsha is feeling very bold and empowered.
Good for her, girl. Life's too short. Go get it.
I know.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I agree. And I would like to touch on the thought where she thinks she had survived this long and would only survive the road ahead if she continued to be unnoticed. And I keep thinking about how Manon had said the Crochen witches often hide out as healers.
Oh.
And we know many of the healers were once gifted with magic as well. And I am beginning to wonder if Sorsha is worried about staying unnoticed because of the magic or because she is possibly a Crochen witch.
Ooh, that is my favorite theory right now. That's canon. Yes, she's a Crochen witch. Case closed. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm so on board with this. That's a really good observation and call out. I didn't think about it. I honestly glazed over it. But when you read that quote, it does sound a little odd, especially that she had survived this long and would survive the road ahead. That's a weird way to describe living your life. Like, oh, I'm surviving, you know? So that, ooh, I'm excited. I love it. I have nothing to offer, but yes, I like it.
We like this theory. I do
We
too.
do.
We switch to Chaol's perspective, who is about to meet Adian, Ren, and Murtaugh for another spy sesh in the slums of Riftgold. Chaol hated he had lied to his men about what he was doing, but he sets his thoughts aside as a two-note whistle signals Adian's arrival a few blocks down from the decrepit boarding house they had agreed to meet at. Adian strides out from the mist, and Chaol notices he had traded the Sword of Orinth out for an assortment of blades and knives tonight. He asks Adian where the others are, and Adian responds, "Don't get your undergarments in a twist. They'll be here soon. What's the rush?" Chaol reveals.
Sorry. Okay, before we go any farther, as the resident Chaol defender, I have something I must say. Okay. So I pulled the quote from this part because I think it's important. So it's when Chaol is talking about how he's leaving to go meet Adian, and he says, Chaol had hated himself when he lied to his men about where he was going, hated the way they had wished him fun, hated that they trusted him, the man who was meeting with their mortal enemies. And I think this quote is important for a couple of reasons. Mm-hmm. The first is that we have talked many, many times about how honorable and loyal Chaol is. This is evident in the very beginning in Throne of Glass, as he is so protective of Dorian, takes his job seriously. And when he kills Cain, he feels this deep sense of guilt for, murdering, quote unquote, an innocent, also quote unquote person. We've known this about Chaol's character for a long time. And I think oftentimes people give Chaol a really hard time for his harsh language and internal thoughts about how Celaena / Aelin was his mortal enemy, right? This is a very common word choice when used to describe Chaol's thoughts about anybody that's not from Otterland, basically. I know we've talked about this. That's really strong language to call Celaena, a girl that he loved, his mortal enemy, right? But we can see here clearly that this quote isn't solely reserved for Celaena. It's for anyone who is technically an enemy of Otterland, which is basically everyone in Erilea. Everybody is an enemy of Otterland, right? And so first, I just want to point that distinction out. Next, I think it's important to note that his loyalty and honor runs so deep that he even hates himself for behaving in a disingenuous way, and dare I say, traitorous. And so I think that's important to note, too, that it's his loyalty is so deeply seated in his sense of self that he even turns that frustration, hatred inwards to himself. And so I think that's important to parse that it's not just, hatred or whatever strong feeling you want to label towards even Adian or Celaena. And I think that's important. And so to continue on, Exhibit A, after Chaol tells Adian of the deal he made with his father, which we're about to talk about, even Adian says, damn, I didn't think that kind of honor still existed in Otterland. And I feel this is especially meaningful coming from Adian because Adian is loyal as fuck to Aelin. Like, even for 10 years, he thought she was dead, and he still chased this sense of loyalty and honor that he had to Aelin. And so I think that's especially meaningful coming from Adian. It also reminds me of the quote from Calm where Celaena is thinking about Chaol. And I think it's right around or after his birthday dinner. And she says something to the effect of like, he was the kind of man that courts dreamed of having. He was so loyal and honorable, that it had restored her faith that men like that could even exist anymore. And we talked a lot about that because that was like a very romantic thought and everything. But I think all of that speaks to Chaol's character. And so I just want to bring shed a light on that in the context of Chaol's character development. And then especially when we add that to the conversation we had in the last episode about Chaol's worldview and how it had started to shift because his whole life he was taught to believe that he was doing the right thing in protecting Otterlanian families. Right. And I think all of that is really important to understand Chaol's character and why he makes the choices he does. But more importantly, I think he gets beat up a lot for, like at the end of Calm, where Aelin was his mortal enemy, and people are like, oh my God, how could he say that? And I don't think he means it in a way that he feels that way, but technically what society has deemed as his mortal enemy. And so I think that's important when we talk about Chaol because I have a feeling this is going to keep coming up. Just a hunch. And so another day as a Chaol defender. Check.
Good job.
Thank you.
But but I agree that I think all of this is just to demonstrate how much Chaol is struggling with reconciling everything he was taught to believe, what he actually believes, and now what he is going to ultimately do about it.
Yes. Well, and it's so interesting, too, that you say that, because I think that's a really good way to put it. But his ultimate loyalty is to Dorian and, quote unquote, protecting the crown. And what he's doing is technically traitorous, but he's doing it to protect Dorian.
Yes.
So it's just this weird, confusing kind of web of intention, motivation, reasoning that just gets really muddled. And I think that's probably really confusing for Chaol because Chaol sees the world in black and white. He is not a great character. And I would imagine that would be difficult for anyone to navigate, but specifically for Chaol.
Yes, totally agree. Excellent point.
Thank you.
To continue, Chaol reveals he would be leaving for Aniel in a few weeks and was running out of time to make sure he had done something for the prince before he departed. This leads to a conversation about Chaol's relationship to his father and why he had worked with him despite their strained relationship. He tells Adian, my father is a powerful man. He had the ear of many influential members of the court and is on the king's council. It was the only way I could get her sent to Wendelin. Adian was impressed by the bargain Chaol had made with his father, stating, I didn't think that kind of honor still existed in Otterland. Then Chaol asked Adian about his father. We learn Adian's mother was kin to her, and her is italicized, and that even on her sickbed, she had never admitted to Adian who his father was. Adian reckons, I don't know if it was shame or because she couldn't remember or to protect me somehow. Once I was brought over here, I didn't really care, but I'd rather have no father than your father. And obviously, I would like to know who Adian's father is because it seems like it might be important.
Yes, I even hit the table. I don't know why, but I love this shit. This is one of my favorite fucking tropes in fantasy books. I don't know what my weird obsession with this is, but when a character doesn't know who their father or mother is, it is just like one of the best tropes because immediately you're like, that's going to be important. They have a super important parentage for a very specific reason. It's going to be a big reveal and it's just going to be emotional or exciting. And I love that shit. And I'm so happy that this trope has entered the chat because I am here for it. I have no theories. I have no thoughts on who it could possibly be. Oh, okay. I just said it. Okay. Remember how you said they seem more like brother and sister? What if plot twist, Ro is actually Adian's father and they are brother and sister?
Whoa.
I don't know.
Actually, that would be really freaking weird. So they're like half brother and sister. Ooh. So to continue, before Chaol could ask anything else, they are interrupted by a figure rasping for breath. They quickly realize it was Ren, and he was injured by some men who had followed him. Ren assures them Murtaugh was safe and then states he had been cornered by 8 men, 2 of whom he had killed, leaving 6 more men who were likely close behind. Adian, with his space senses, detects the men approaching and quickly directs Chaol and Ren to go hide behind some barrels and keep their mouths shut. From behind the barrels, Chaol sees 6 men stalk into the alley as Adian draws his knives and purrs, "None of you are leaving this alley alive." And he made good on that promise. Chaol marvels at Adian's skill and thinks no wonder Adian had risen to such high ranking so quickly. He'd never seen another man fight like that. Only Celaena had come close. Adian strides over to them and tosses a dark scrap of fabric at them. It was made of a black, heavy material, and emblazoned on it with dark thread was a wyvern, the royal sigil. Okay, so immediately my head went to the fact that this is the secret set of guards that the king has that we first learned existed when he executed Rena Goldsmith in Crown of Midnight. And these are the guards that he uses to do his secret bidding and his spying. And, you know, the king always referred to the fact that he had spies and knew what was going on. And this must be them again.
Okay. So I had the exact same thought and conclusion, but I meant to rain on your parade a little bit. And I was very disappointed as I continued my search. So I had quite literally the exact same thing. And just to solidify that we are 100% accurate, here's a quote from Com. Hours later, the king of Otterland stood at the back of the dungeon chambers as his secret guards dragged Rena Goldsmith forward. So we had a whole little convo. We're like, he has secret guards. What the fuck? You know, whatever. Okay. But then I got curious. I got my little ebook, started typing. Okay. And I typed in secret guards, and it came up with one other hit. And the counterpoint in this is pretty direct to Chaol not recognizing them. It's, again, sorry guys, this is my ebook, so it's harder to do the page number, but it's page 716. This is when Chaol was captured the first time by the rebels, and unknown at the time he was talking to Ren. He thinks when he got free, he'd kill him for letting Celaena get tangled up with them, and then he'd make sure the king and his secret guards got their hands on all of these bastards. This is a direct thought from Chaol, which would seem to indicate that Chaol is aware of the king's secret guard. So that calls into question then these guards, because he doesn't recognize them. He doesn't recognize the men. He also doesn't recognize the uniform, which I also think is interesting. Because immediately I was like, oh, it's the secret guards, obviously. And I'm like, Chaol just doesn't know. But then when I did my little search, I'm like, oh shit, he does know. So I don't know if that's just a little oopsie on the editing and we caught it and they didn't. I don't know. So, but I just had to drop that there. I don't know. I got nothing on that.
I guess it's not out of the possibility that it's some other group or something, but I don't know. That is kind of weird. I don't know who else it would be though. Like if it's not a group that's working for the king.
Well, they're definitely working for the king, I feel like. That's without question. It's just why doesn't Chaol know who they are or doesn't recognize them or the uniform? So I don't know. Need more information.
Yes, definitely. But to round out this chapter, Chaol notes he didn't recognize the uniform, but Adian states from the sound of it, there are more of them out there and they're combing the slums door to door for Ren. We need a place to hide. Ren, though barely conscious, manages to say, I know where. And that ends chapter 29. Moving on to chapter 30. Chaol and Adian support a barely conscious Ren as they pass through the now very busy streets of the slums. They make it to the opium den. Ren told them would be safe just as the shouts of soldiers nearby alert them that they needed to get inside quickly.
When they're first walking to the opium den, there's a very, very quick line where some lady of the night makes a play for Adian and he brushes her off and he's like, I don't pay for what I can get for free. Which, first of all, LOL, so funny. But then Chaol goes on to think, somehow it felt like a lie since Chaol hadn't seen or heard of Adian sharing anyone's bed all these weeks. But perhaps knowing that Aelin was alive changed his priorities. And I only called attention to this because now I'm wondering if Adian is gay. And I'm only calling attention to that because this would really hinder my Adian ship, okay? So I'm very worried about the future.
You're like, damn it.
Of Adian. So, I mean, for my selfish sake, I hope not. But if he is, that's okay. But I did think that was interesting just because the description of him is that he's such a ladies' man, that he's sort of a player like Dorian. And especially when Adian first comes into the chapter, when he first comes back and he's talking to Dorian and he's like, if I recall, I left you with 2 redheaded twins. He totally gives off like a big player vibe. But then to hear Chaol think, actually, I haven't ever heard of him actually ending up with anyone. So I don't know. I just only had to call attention to that because I want Adian and I to be together. But that's not possible if he's gay. But
yeah, if. It could just be that his whole Playboy facade was part of his overall facade.
True.
Like he was just, we don't really know what Adian's doing. Honestly, he's probably too freaking busy.
I was
running
just
around trying to track shit down. He ain't got time to be
man or
with.
Yeah, male or female. He doesn't ain't got
anybody.
Time. I was going to say he's totally right for the trope of, number one, the people you love are a weakness. And so he doesn't want to risk anyone. And number 2, he's so loyal and devoted to his cause that he's like, I simply do not have the time to have a relationship. So we'll see if that changes. But I just thought that was a funny thought when I had it. I was like,
I know.
Damn.
That was a funny line.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know either. I don't know what's going on. They stumble inside and immediately gag at the stank of unwashed bodies and waste. But an aging madam quickly ushers them down a hallway as she prattles about prices to disguise what they were doing. They are brought to a veiled alcove, and the woman quickly commands them to get Ren changed while she sets up the room to play the part. Adian notes the slice through Ren's belly was just shallow enough to keep his intestines in, but he wraps the wound while noting the multitude of scars Ren already had, thinking if he survived, this probably wouldn't be the worst of them. The madam applies some powders and paste to Chaol's face so he'd look like a druggie, and then states, lay back, limp and loose, and keep the pipe in your hand. Smoke it if you need to take the edge off. Once prepped, the madam leaves the alcove to greet the soldiers that had just entered in search of Ren. She puts on a show of offering them private rooms, but the men tell her off, stating, woman, enough. The men make their way from room to room, and Chaol hopes his own performance was convincing as the curtains are ripped back. Adian squints at them and asks, is that the wine? As Chaol blearily smiles at the 6 men. Chaol wonders who they could possibly be, but their acting was convincing enough because the men just swear at them before leaving. 1 hour later, Murtaugh finds them in the madam's private office, where she disinfected and stitched up Ren's wound.
I just want to say, the madam of the opium den is the real hero in this set of chapters. Like, she was so good. I thoroughly enjoyed her very brief stint in this chapter. I don't know why, but man, she's my hero.
Adian keeps an eye on the locked door, but asks Murtaugh, why were you being followed and who were those men? Murtaugh doesn't know, though he wonders if one of the many informants in Ren's network possibly betrayed them. Adian warns him to lay low after informing him that the uniforms had the royal sigil on them, and even Chaol hadn't known who they were. Then Chaol asks where they could move Ren to, but Murtaugh reveals they had been homeless for quite a while, squatting in abandoned buildings and taking work here and there when they could, though it had been difficult these days. Chaol quickly realizes that they wouldn't have access to the Allsbrook money since they had been in hiding for so long, but Adian asks Murtaugh to tell Chaol about what they knew about the magic. So over several hours, Murtaugh tells Chaol what they'd been able to figure out. According to Murtaugh and Ren, the waves of magic formed a triangle across the continent. The points go from Rifthold to the frozen wastes, then down to the desert peninsula, and then finally back up to Rifthold. They believed it was a spell that had caused it, and Adian reckons a spell sent from specific points, like a beacon. So this confirms what we had figured in the last episode, though it clarifies that the triangle actually encompasses a much wider area than what we had speculated. We thought it went from Rifthold to the Fairy Gap to the desert and then back to Rifthold, but the wastes are much farther west.
Yeah.
Like they extend way farther out.
Which makes sense because the witches lost their magic too. I mean, I know they weren't necessarily inhabiting the waste, but we do know it encompasses most of Erilea, so that's fair.
Chaol asked if there was a way to undo it, but Murtaugh states that the sources they had been working with fled after the incident with Archer. Murtaugh states they needed to confirm their suspicions, but the points they believe the spell originated from correspond with places that are occupied by the king's forces. Chaol takes a moment to reflect on the rough life Ren and Murtaugh had all this time, wondering, had the Lord ever felt safe or at peace at any point in the past 10 years? It would explain that anger, the reckless anger that coursed through all the young, shattered hearts of Terrasin, including Celaena's. I like that Chaol is getting all this background from people who had experienced the hardship that came with the king's conquests firsthand. We know, as we talked about earlier, that he's been on a journey of unwinding all the years of propaganda he grew up believing, but I think it's really beginning to sink in for Chaol, and that is especially evident in how he reflects on being able to see the similarities between people like Adian, Ren, Murtaugh, and Celaena. And then I do also think it's especially evident then in what he does next.
I had the exact same quote pulled out. At first, I feel so sad for Ren and Murtaugh, thinking of they face so many sorrows and hardships and have been displaced basically their whole lives. And that's got to be really hard when you think about it. But I think that you're exactly right, that this interaction, this conversation is so helpful in helping Chaol humanize the rebel and their cause. I think it helps him contextualize the damage and destruction that the King of Adarlan has subjected thousands, if not millions of people to. And then kind of in a similar thought, which I think you kind of alluded to this, is that it helps him understand Celaena better, especially the part about reckless anger. And I think this is empathy that Chaol desperately needs to repair his relationship with Celaena. And so I think all of the experiences in this book, and by this book I mean Heir of Fire so far, have been really vital in helping Chaol see that he needs to switch sides, so to speak. And I know we talked about this in the last episode in his conversation with Adian about he was told his whole life that he was protecting Adarlanian families, etc. But I think all of this is really building to sort of a crossroads for Chaol where he really has to make a decision about where he wants to go in the future.
I think so too.
And then the other thing, I thought this is just kind of a quick thing, but I thought was important to note when Murtaugh is showing Chaol the map and they're talking about how it makes a triangle, they're discussing all the points on the map that make the triangle. Those areas are heavily guarded by the king's men. And Adian makes a kind of funny joke. He's like, oh, that's why you've been so nice to me. And so I think this chapter actually starts the framework for Adian's actual storyline for this book. And it's that they want to use Adian to get access to the points where the wave of magic emanated from. So I'm wondering if this is foreshadowing for Adian leaving Rifthold or finding an excuse to go to these 3 different places and do some snooping and trying to discover what it is that, if there is still something there that's keeping the magic at bay. So I'm very interested to see if we're going to go on that journey with Adian.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think you're right. Hopefully.
Yeah,
hopefully
I know. That would be so
explore.
exciting. Yes, to discover the source. Because I'm sure he used the word keys or a word key to maybe craft the spell, but like what's still holding it in place? Maybe there's beacons that can be destroyed or something. I don't know. It really opens up a lot of possibilities.
Well, I'm still thinking that they must be constructions similar to the clock tower and stuff like that. I don't know exactly what, but clearly those points were crafted and they need to remain intact, it seems like, in order for the spell to hold, right? Yeah. So we'll see what Adian goes to do.
Yeah.
side quests for Adian. So Chaol, in a heartwarming gesture of compassion, offers Celaena's hidden apartment at the warehouse in the slums as a refuge for Ren and Murtaugh to stay in for as long as they needed. Murtaugh attempts to reject the offer, but Chaol insists the owner won't mind one bit. And that pretty much rounds out the chapter. But I did wonder what Adian thinks of this, because we know he had a very emotional reaction to being in Celaena's apartment, and he himself hasn't necessarily been super empathetic or forthcoming in helping Ren and Murtaugh outside of exchanging information. You know, I'm sure he may have some thoughts about Chaol now offering up Celaena's apartment to them. But
well,
I don't know, maybe it doesn't matter to him.
I'm wondering if it's because Adian actually didn't know that they were basically homeless, because he even asked, where have you been staying all this time? And then he kind of looks to the side and it says like his throat bobbed. I think he probably didn't realize that. It would be my guess. So I don't think he'll mind, especially because Aelin would house or take care of anyone, especially someone who was from Terrasen.
Right. Okay.
Your note was much more developed. Literally all I wrote was, I knew that damn apartment was going to be important for something. We talked about that stupid apartment so many times. I'm like, well, here we go.
Now we know it's going to be a little rebel hideout.
Mm-hmm.
And that now concludes our episode. To round out this episode, we have our favorite moments still left to share. So Addison, what were your favorite moments?
I still don't like Rowan. But I did think the scene where she shifts and pretends to throw a tantrum and then smacks him upside his pretty little head was honestly hilarious and just a tiny bit cute. And especially when he says, oh, you better run now. You know, it is cute. It was cute. It makes me sick to say that, but it was cute. And then, and then I know we talked about this in the episode, but just the whole shopping scene, and specifically when she says, and she had the sense that her friend might have been proud of the way she went from shop to shop that afternoon, head held high, and charmed the ever-loving hell out of those villagers. It was just cute. It was just really cute. I know. And then I loved when it says, the general drew his fighting knives and purred, none of you are leaving this alley alive. And then it was so sent jittery anticipation. And then the next line is, they didn't. I was like, and then literally the next thing I wrote is, Adian is just so sexy and cool. And he's like, I don't pay for what I can get for free.
I think I think Adian's moved up to your top spot right now.
Yeah.
If he hasn't surpassed Zane Ryerson, he's gonna surpass him soon.
No, one can surpass Zane Ryerson. He's the shadow daddy of my heart.
We'll have to see. You really seem to love Adian a lot.
I do. I don't know why, but I just do.
I love Adian too, but I haven't come up with a blend of our names. So
Adian, it's just too perfect. How can I not?
It is cute. Adian. Those were really nice. I do like those moments. You had more funny ones. I feel like I had more serious ones, or like
you're
more
such a
emotional
sentimental.
ones.
You always do, and then I'm always like, damn. I'm like, you should go first because now I sound shallow as fuck. Oh, speaking of, what were your favorite moments?
Ooh, okay. So my first one was with Manon and Abraxos, and she thinks each of the scars, chipped teeth and broken claws, the mutilated tail, they weren't the markings of a victim. Oh no, they were the trophies of a survivor. Abraxos was a warrior who'd had all the odds stacked against him and survived, learned from it, triumphed.
Yeah, very moving.
I like their relationship. I really like Manon and Abraxos.
Oh, you're going to enjoy the next set of chapters then. You're going to get a lot of Manon and Abraxos.
I'm so excited. And then my next one was, again, with Manon and Abraxos. And she says to him, you and I are going to learn how to fly, and then we'll stain this kingdom red.
Ooh, you're a violent little thing, aren't you?
Manon's violent. But yeah, I did like it. She's going to go get that retribution with Abraxos by her side. And then after that, I liked when Celaena's running through the forest after she's shifted and she thinks, how had she been afraid of this body for so long? Even her soul felt looser, as if it had been locked up and buried and was only now starting to shake free. Not joy, perhaps not ever, but a glimmer of what she had been before grief had decimated her so thoroughly.
That one, you know what? I think maybe some of these, I'm like, these are really good, but I thought I was getting too many favorite moments. I'm like, I have to pare it down, so then I didn't. But that was a very moving scene where she, she finally starts to feel something other than just absolute despair. So it was really nice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was one of the first times that we've gotten a true shift from her since she's been in Wendelin, I think. So it was a big moment for her to finally accept her Fae form. And then my last one was she had the sense that her friend might have been proud of the way she went from shop to shop that afternoon, head held high, and charmed the ever-loving hell out of those villagers. So that was the same one as yours.
That means it's one of the best super ones because we both loved it so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Nehemia. Rest in peace.
I know.
Well, that concludes our episode. So thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Book Jump Fantasy Podcast. As always, we are so glad you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and check out our social media pages to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today. So stay nerdy, everyone, and we'll catch you all next week for Heir of Fire episode 6. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. Beep.
Beep. Yep. Done. Dorian. Oh, what am I saying? Oh wait, I gotta add the Onyx Storm countdown day.
Oops,
real quick.
I got lazy because you've been spoiling me. I bet it's like 119. I'm gonna guess
118.
Dang, that was close. Dang. Days pass for Celaena. Wait, is this a really long one? Oh fuck! Just let me back up. Wait, pause. There's like a really bad lag.
Oh, I had a feeling this would happen. Whoa.
Ooh. Hello, Baba. Hello, Baba.
Why am I so close?
Hello.
It's fine. Oh my gosh. Wait, why am I so close? What did I do?
The people want to see your beautiful face. She's really playing. Oh my god.
She could have flown. Could have
scoured.
Oops. Could have scoured. I know. I was like, that's not right.
Whoops.